When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, like all music does, towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it is over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. I just shared with you Mary Oliver's poem, When Death Comes. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Morris Charles, Dean of Rockefeller Memorial Chapel here at the University of Chicago. Richard Paul Taub, whose life we gather to celebrate today, was certainly one who made his presence known. No mere visitor in this world, Professor Taub, in the words of William Shakespeare, whose poetry he enjoyed, was a scholar, and a ripe and good one, exceeding wise, fair-spoken, and persuading. During our time together today, we will hear live and pre-recorded remembrances from those who knew Richard well. We begin with a number of faculty colleagues in turn. Amanda Woodward, Dean of the Social Sciences Division, Ralph Nicholas, William Rainey Harper Professor Emeritus in Anthropology and in Social Sciences in the college, and Elizabeth Clemens, William Rainey Harper Distinguished Service Professor in Sociology and the college. Dean Woodward.
I'm glad that we're able to gather virtually today to remember and honor Richard Taub. Now, Richard retired just before I began my term as Dean in the Social Sciences, and I did not have the benefit of the close everyday relationship of being his departmental colleague. I did have the good fortune to talk with him over the years and to experience firsthand his disarming frankness, his playful love of argument, and his infectious energy, qualities that I will always remember. The way I mainly came to know Richard is in the way you know a river, by studying the canyon it has sculpted over time. From a bit of a distance, but with a view, especially with the benefit of time, of the broad influence that this force of nature had on our shared landscape. So I wanted to mention three aspects of Richard's influence, ones that are particularly salient to me as I look at the shape of the Social Sciences Division. I'm going to start with the Department of Comparative Human Development. Richard became chair of the Department of Comparative Human Development in 2000, and that was the same year it became an independent department. He continued in that role for 4 terms, seeing through the department through a period of significant change and through a time when, despite those changes, the department's core values and culture were preserved and renewed. Richard's leadership was essential to that. Now, comparative human development is an intensely interdisciplinary department. It's a space in which profound differences in assumptions and methods are not only tolerated, but are in fact essential to the collaborative project of the department. And I know that his colleagues in CHD would agree that Richard set the model for how to keep a diverse department unified, a model that matters not only for comparative human development, but more generally for the work in the social sciences. The second thing I wanted to mention were Richard's contributions as a teacher, which were many. In 1975, Richard took over and reinvented the public policy major, a program he led for 2 decades. And it is now among the largest majors in the college. It's known for its integration of theory with problems and experiences in the real world. And it's a program that's enticing to students because, in fact, it's a very powerful way to be educated, that intersection. It's a model we emulate as we continue to innovate undergraduate programming in new areas in the social sciences. And I see this as just a natural expression, and one of many, of Richard's engagement and talent as a teacher and mentor. As we'll hear today, Richard inspired generations of students at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. He was a valued mentor and a dedicated and demanding, in the best sense of the word, advisor and teacher. And finally, this leads me to my final point. In his 5 decades at the University of Chicago, Richard was the kind of interlocutor who left an impression, an indelible impression, in the minds of his colleagues and students. He affected their thinking and he helped them to find new ideas. I hear about Richard all the time from those who knew him and learned from him about the ways in which he shaped our intellectual community. I know we'll hear more about all of this in the remarks that will follow. Richard will absolutely be missed, but the reminders he left behind here will long endure. And now I'd like to welcome Ralph Nicholas, who will share a few words.
Dick Taub's well-known work in American communities in Chicago and rural Arkansas put the earlier research he did in India in a shadow. In one way, his India research was different from what he did later in the US. His doctoral work dealt with the elite Indian administrative service, later known, best known as the IAS officers in Orissa. The IAS are products of the most competitive examinations. They're very conscious of their high status and in Indian society, as well as in governing the nation. The new Indian entrepreneurs whom Dick and Doris studied don't have the polish of the IAS, but they have the prestige of achievement and the social benefits of wealth. Although these tiny groups are not easily accessible segments of Indian society, it's not difficult to visualize how Dick's direct, unassuming way of talking to people, repeatedly opening the door for him. How could you not talk to him? The importance of these studies endures because of the deep insight they offer into the sociology of India's development at a really critical time in the opening of a democratic society. Understanding what's important in making of a post-colonial, of a modern society in a post-colonial state is testimony to Dick's vision as a social scientist. The same thing can be said of work he did subsequently in this country. The South Shore Bank was, of course, an entrepreneurial creation, although that research was as much about community as it was about entrepreneurship. However, the importance of Dick's personal relationships with the people involved was the distinct element of the research. The South Shore Bank was inspired in part by an experiment conducted not very far from where Dick did his original research in India, in Bangladesh. Muhammad Yunus is an economist in Bangladesh. He's now well known because he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for the creation of what's now known as microcredit. Yunus did his PhD at Vanderbilt, He was in the US in 1961 during the Bangladesh Independence War. And he worked with our Chicago-based group, the Bangladesh Defense League, as editor of the newsletter. When he returned to Bangladesh as professor of economics at Chittagong University, he began to work out a conception of rural economic development based on the sociology of the community. It became the Grameen Bank, the village bank. The idea of community relationships as collateral for loan making was attractive to people who created the South Shore Bank. And Dick followed them as they connected to Yunus in Bangladesh. And this became the model as well for a community bank in central Arkansas, where Dick followed them as well. Now it happens that my wife and I have known Yunus since 1971. He took us to some villages near Chittagong when we visited him in 1973, during the time he was conceiving of the Grameen Bank. And although my research is in Bengal, my mother's family is from central Arkansas. And my parents lived there when Dick went there for research. The commonalities between the villages in Bangladesh and the more fragmented rural people served by the Southern Development Bank Corporation are not so numerous, and no one understood this more quickly than Dick. But it's easy to imagine him having the same kind of direct, frank conversations with ordinary people in rural Arkansas that he had with people in Orissa. We often talked about the similarities and the differences, but Dick's foremost method of investigation worked just as well in both places. He just got people to talk to him. Now you'll hear from Elizabeth Clemens.
Onwards and upwards, side by side, keep hammering. Richard inscribed those words on the flyleaf of my copy of the book that came out of that work in Arkansas, Doing Development in Arkansas. We sought to understand how to promote economic enterprise and well-being in those small communities. And these words capture so much of his spirit and his ethic of being in this world. The side-by-side piece of it is the easiest to grasp. Richard was gregarious and generous with a gift for friendship and empathy. When I came back to Chicago, now as a faculty member, I didn't really know him. No doubt we had been on opposing sides of the very complicated fault lines that had marked the sociology department when I was a graduate student. But he immediately reached out, started a friendship, and after a particularly contentious faculty meeting about what I honestly can't remember, he took me to lunch to make sure that I was all right. Richard, I said, no one has lost their job. No one has died. Little did I know, a few months later, my not yet husband was on a plane to Albuquerque as his mother was dying. At the same time, wrenched by the thought that to be with me would mean to live in Chicago, awful of awfuls, rather than the desert Southwest. He sat by this kind man who listened carefully, eventually saying that he thought he knew a bit about the woman in question. From that moment, Richard and Betty welcomed us both in, doing so much to make us at home, both out in the Southwest and here in Chicago. The power of Richard's side by side issued full force in the planning for his retirement party, which happened when I was chair of the sociology department. As anyone who was there will remember, and it was a truly rocking party, this was a testament to a life fully lived, both within and beyond the university. The reach of his friendships and the respect that transcended hard-fought and often bitter battles testify to the multiplication of all of Richard's moments of side by side. But to dwell on this would make Richard appear to be a saint, and he was so much more than that. Onwards and upwards, keep hammering. Richard managed to be both a beloved colleague and a burr under the saddle of the powerful. He had the rare virtue of being both a passionate critic and a dedicated builder. He could look at an institution, including above all this one, and simultaneously be outraged at its flaws and determined to build something better. Those impulses found their clearest expression in the public policy studies program. It was not designed to turn out future technocrats, but rather to engage students deeply in communities where they would bring their skills in as budding social scientists to produce deeper understandings and in collaboration with the members of those communities, always in collaboration, to figure out paths forward, onward, and upward. He brought this same strange and wonderful combination of virtues to maintaining a home for the diverse set of intellects that define comparative human development, and as a friend and mentor during the years when I took on administrative roles. He shared the complicated history of this place, since understanding that history is often the key to getting things done. And it doesn't hurt to have studied the Indian Civil Service if you want to understand something about the University of Chicago. Be confident in the onward and upward. Don't be afraid to hammer. Those were his lessons. And always I try to follow his good advice. But I miss his presence deeply. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Clemens. Now we will enjoy pre-recorded comments from John Eason, Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and William Julius Wilson, the Lewis P. and Linda L. Geiser University Professor Emeritus, Department of Sociology, Harvard University. Their remarks will be followed by a musical interlude and slides showing scenes from Richard Taub's life.
Richard is credited with being the secret ingredient on some of the greatest dissertations to come out of the Chicago School of Sociology. Many would later become groundbreaking books that shaped the field. His role is especially salient as an ethnographer as he trained cohorts of students produced by giants in the field like William Julius Wilson. While he was the secret ingredient for many, he was the main ingredient for others like me. These others were more likely to be women, LGBTQ, people of color, and especially Black. This is not to say that UChicago was not tough on everyone. After all, this place is where fun comes to die. But for those of us who did not arrive with an abundance of social capital, he provided community and much of the informal mentoring needed not only to survive, but to thrive in a rigorous environment that adheres to the life of the mind. Although he was 35 years my senior, when I met Richard, we were best of friends as kindred spirits born with old souls. One of the most valuable things he taught me was his theory of the UChicago hello. This came out of conversations where he asked me how I was adjusting to campus life after being a lifelong Chicago resident. I explained that things were okay, but the campus seemed weird because if you spoke to someone on the quad, even if you knew them, they wouldn't speak. He said he noticed this trend as well, adding that in many instances, people would look down and away. This look down and away is what he labeled the UChicago hello. He explained further, it wasn't a good or bad thing, it was just a thing. This has no reflection on you. You are not crazy. This was comforting. He explained further that the lack of social graces was consistent with the ethos of the institution. This seemingly small lesson helped me navigate this difficult institutional environment. It also let me know the value of social skills and that Richard valued that. This story also speaks to one of the most valuable theoretical contributions that Richard makes. As a forerunner to key sociological concepts like collective efficacy and organizational density, institutional actor theory provides theoretical purchase crucial to explaining how organizations interact with their environment. Institutions can interact with environments in a multitude of ways. As a scholar of punishment, I have found that many aspects of prisons are comparable to those of such other institutional actors as colleges and hospitals, and maintaining community stability and order. As Richard's students, we are living proof of his contribution to knowledge, pedagogy, and commitment to public service as we continue to build bridges by bringing the best of the Academy to improve communities in need.
My name is William Julius Wilson, and I had the distinct pleasure of co-authoring a book with Richard Taub entitled There Goes the Neighborhood, subtitle Racial, Ethnic, and Class Tensions in 4 Chicago Neighborhoods and Their Meaning for America. The book was published by Alfred A. Knopf in 2006. The purpose of our study was to explore how the residents in 4 working and lower middle class Chicago neighborhoods populated by different ethnic groups reacted to looming racial, ethnic, or class changes because these neighborhoods were the likely destination of outside groups seeking affordable and desirable places to live. Richard Taub and I supervised a superb team of graduate students who conducted field research in these 4 neighborhoods for almost 3 years. Richard played a major role in supervising the ethnographic field research in each of the 4 neighborhoods, including participant observations in multiple settings, block club meetings, local church meetings, other neighborhood activities and events, and casual conversations and interactions with neighborhood residents, as well as those who work there. Armed with guidelines that Richard set up, the sociology graduate students entered these communities as observers, mapping key locations, conducting interviews, meeting with individuals informally, and in some cases providing voluntary services. The data they collected were very rich and provided the basis for the major arguments we presented in There Goes the Neighborhood. The successful completion of this complex study was in large measure due to Richard's careful guidance. Thank you.
as we continue our celebration of a deeply meaningful life. We will hear comments from John Boyer, Dean of the College, and Martin A. Ryerson, Distinguished Service Professor, and then another video collage of comments from Jim Leitzel, Executive Director of Public Policy Studies in the College, Chad Broughton, Associate Instructional Professor in the Social Sciences Collegiate Division, and Omar McRoberts, Associate Professor of Sociology and the College. These will be followed by a musical interlude and more photos in the life of Richard Taub. Dean Boyer.
Thank you very much, Dean Charles. Warmest greetings to all of you who are on this program today. I'm delighted to be able to offer some memories about Richard and his role in the college. I first met Richard when he was the Associate Dean of the College in the early 1980s. Richard was a close collaborator of Don Levine and Herman Sinaiko and a number of other senior people at that point who were trying to create a new spirit for the college, I would say a more pro-student spirit, eliminating hassles, improving the climate of student life, improving the quality of teaching at a time when the college was very small and somewhat marginal in the larger affairs of the university. And Richard was, as Associate Dean, was very interested in curricular offerings at the time. I remember at the time I was the chairman of the History of Western Civilization staff, which is this very large core course encompassing many different faculty from several departments. And he came to me one day and he said, I've been looking at what you're doing and it strikes me as being fairly rigid and fairly traditional. And have you ever thought of changing? And he simply started saying, change this and change that. And I think, well, I was a fairly young faculty. I said, I'll go back and I'll tell my senior colleagues about these ideas. And of course, they were extremely annoyed. Like, who is this guy, Richard Taub, telling them how to teach European civilization? But Richard was actually right. And I think when we're to look at our civilization offerings today, they're very much more in the format and the spirit of what Richard was trying to get at in the early 1980s. My point is that he never saw a curricular tradition or a curricular orthodoxy that he did not want to challenge or change. And he was very good at this role of classic, and I would say a productive iconoclast. I also got to know him in the context of his work as director of the public policy major. Amanda Woodward has already told us that he was very important in kind of reviving and bringing that major back from the kind of rather modest state in which it existed in the 1970s. And he not only rebuilt the program and came up with a new curriculum, and which was quite different from the one that went before, but he was also very keen on moving beyond what he would call book learning. And he was very much convinced. I remember he came to me one day and said, we got to do something to get these kids out of the university, into the neighborhoods. They ought to be knocking on doors. They ought to be getting to know people. They ought to be able to meet people very different from themselves. And that ought to be one of the foundational structures that would undergird our public policy program. And I said, great, how do we do that? And of course, he had a whole slew of ideas about how we would do it. They were rather costly, but they were important, and we tried to do them. And again, he was working against the grade. This way of teaching now is a kind of a settled matter. It's very, very important. We do it now a lot, but that wasn't the case 30 years ago. And he was really ahead of his time and ahead of many people's time in advocating for these kinds of hands-on practice-based learning opportunities. And a third memory is I remember in the mid-1990s, this was the time of a lot of turmoil about the core and about the curriculum and the size of the college. And I asked Richard to engineer and implement a major survey of student life on our campus to try to find out what the students actually thought of their experiences, academic, extracurricular, paracurricular at the University of Chicago. And I remember Richard telling me, John, if you go ahead and do this, you're going to find out a lot of things that you don't want to know, or you might not want to know. I remember like, well, is this a good idea? And he said, no, exactly. This is precisely for that reason. This is a really good idea, that it's very important that we, as it were, kind of peel back these self-protective and often mythic layerings about what we're doing and figure out what's actually going on among our student body. Richard organized a quite wonderful survey, over 600 students, hour-long interviews using a lot of graduate students to help them. And I think no one at the time could have done this, the kind of imagination, the kind of execution that was necessary to pull off that survey. And it was of very great importance in terms of implementing the new curriculum and implementing the new student life programs that we created over the faculty created over the late 1990s and early 2000s. So Richard, in some ways, was foundational to that. Richard was someone who not only conceived of bold plans and programs, but he had the ability to translate those programs into sustainable action and to make them work. He was a truth teller, and he was unafraid to ask institutions to fulfill their better natures. Universities depend upon good citizenship and effective teaching and research, but they also need leaders who can seize the moment, who can challenge existing orthodoxies, who can move faculty opinion in positive ways and in productive new directions. And above all, they need wise leaders who can work collaboratively with other faculty to actually get things done. Richard was clear thinking about the foibles and the myths of institutions, including our own. He was fearless, and he was impatiently committed to learning and acting upon what he thought to be the truth in order to make life better and more intellectually stimulating for our students. He was an extraordinary intellectual personality, and really an extraordinary intellectual personality, someone who respected traditions, but who refused to concede what I would call an artificial reverence for those traditions. I'm very proud to have been able to collaborate with him on so many of these projects, and I deeply cherish his memory. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jim Leitzel, and I'm a longtime friend of Richard's and Betty's, and colleague of Richard's and Betty's for that matter. I succeeded Richard as director of the public policy major in 2004 when Richard moved over to head up the human development program. I wanted to say a little bit about what Richard means to the public policy major at the University of Chicago, and also about what he means to me personally. The public policy major at the University of Chicago essentially exists because of Richard. It's in its current incarnation. Its curriculum is what Richard designed some 50 years ago, and he headed up the major for decades and built it into one of the largest majors in social sciences. But it's not just the curriculum and the details of that curriculum that are that draw from Richard, but really the ethos of public policy is infused, I think, with Richard's spirit. This manifests itself in a few different ways. One has to do with the purpose of the major, and the purpose is quite clearly to make human lives better, and particularly the lives of people who are disadvantaged. And secondly, the approach that we take is a social science approach. It's a thoroughly academic approach. It involves theoretical rigor, it involves the centrality of data, but it's rather eclectic. It's open with respect to the theoretical frameworks that are involved or the methods of gathering data, so you can learn what's really happening with people on the ground. The orientation of the major is liberal arts. It's a major in the college, which is a liberal arts college, and even though it strongly borrows from the social sciences, or is even part of the social sciences, it remains a liberal arts major. It's not surprising for someone like Richard, who was, of course, a world-class social scientist, but still had a deep interest in things like opera and Shakespeare and poetry and the humanities writ large. Also, it is a college major, and when Richard was the head of public policy, and I think beyond, college student interest really came first. I think that public policy remains very much a student-centered major, and that draws from Richard's decades of leadership in the program. Richard Taub made public policy into a great major, and what is best in public policy today continues to reflect his vision. Our best senior theses reflect not just Richard's vision, but actually his name, because every year the best senior theses are given the Taub Prize. For me personally, Richard was an amazingly beneficent mentor and advisor and friend. He was, as everyone knows, I think, he was wise in the ways of the world. He was wise in the ways of the University of Chicago. He brought me to Chicago back in the late 1990s, and I was sort of disciplinarily suspect because I was an economist. But nonetheless, Richard was willing to bring me in and guide me, and he gave me the scope and the motivation to sort of blossom, really, and I think I did so under his leadership. I could not have asked for more in a friend or a colleague or a leader. Take him for all and all. I shall not look upon his like again. Richard was and is an inspiration. Fortunately, Richard's ethos lives on in his friends and his colleagues and his family. and as I've already mentioned, in the public policy major at the University of Chicago. We are all winners of the Taub Prize.
Hi, my name is Chad Broughton. I teach in the public policy program in the college. In autumn 1994, I found myself in a class with a rather idiosyncratic man whose syllabus was simply a list of old books with ugly covers. The class was Problems of Policy Implementation. It was my first quarter as a sociology graduate student. There are two sides of Richard as a teacher, a Jekyll and a Hyde. Dr. Taub, the endearing gentleman scholar, author of 7 books, was a captivating storyteller, full of insight, warmth, and charisma. Mr. Taub, however, was known to harass latecomers and toss out an entire lecture hall for not having read the assigned readings. Dr. Taub was the carrot that made you want to come to class to learn policy implementation. Mr. Taub was the stick that made you fear coming late or unprepared. Richard's Jekyll and Hyde routine, I later realized, was its own masterclass in how to achieve compliance and implement a policy effectively. A few weeks into class, I wrote Richard a letter. Remember those? It was a rather audacious critique of his book about economic development in India. How did Richard respond? Well, he called me in, of course. He seemed strangely exhilarated by the fact that I had been upset by something he had written. We chatted for a long while, and before I knew it, I had been conscripted as a teaching assistant for the next several years. Here's what I wrote in a journal entry from that day. This morning, I met with Professor Taub. He's unusual and very direct. I went on to write that I had seen a set of new pathways open up for me that day in qualitative, narrative, and case study-based research. Richard was the mentor I needed. He put challenges in front of me and always had his door open. What I realize now is that he expected more from me as a teacher and researcher than I thought to expect from myself. And when I fell down, he always had my back. Even after graduate school, he pestered me about publications. When I finally got my book published, I thanked him for all the nagging. He wrote a simple email back. Happy to be your superego, RPT. Mainly, though, I loved Richard for the person he was. He was just so damn fun. I cherish our conversations.
So has Betty been cutting her hair?
Yes. We have some arguments about how much.
Richard was his own man. Here we might think of that notorious Taub holiday letter. Richard would write with such gratitude about his amazing wife Betty and his children and grandchildren, but also subtly insert political commentary, and I quote, "And we are constantly reminded how fortunate we are to have comfortable, full lives, as we watch with disgust the ways in which many in our country chop away at the opportunities for low-income families to achieve decent lives too. All our best wishes, Richard and Betty." So maybe instead of Jekyll and Hyde, the better metaphor for Richard is an M&M. It's a little hard on the outside, but once you bite in, so soft and sweet, and that crunchy outer shell makes everything else a little bit better and a lot more interesting. Yes, Richard was an M&M with a cowboy hat, and he knew it.
As you know, often I was a prick, but that didn't piss off most of the students at all, because the message was it was about caring, and it was not about, I hope, I might be making that up.
What drew me and so many other students to Richard were the kinds of insights into the economic and social world that really stuck. And we have the data to prove it. Countless student letters, plenty of anecdotes, and a big survey of public policy alums all attest to the stickiness of Taub's teaching. Taub alums number in the thousands and include people like David Brooks and David Axelrod.
You know, David Axelrod in his book says that my course was the only good experience he had in the college.
Richard's legacy is all around us. The public policy program is still essentially the program that Richard designed in the 1970s. Like Richard was, it is deeply rooted in the liberal arts, but with a view into that famous real world. We stand on the shoulders of a giant.
What are you most proud of in terms of your legacy with the public policy studies program?
Well, it's existence and growth. I mean, you know, again, we started out with 3 kids in a university that is devoted to, as I said, to abstract thought.
This coming May, we're going to award the 4th annual Richard P. Taub Thesis Prize in Public Policy. It's going to be the first time, though, without Richard there. He was my mentor, my teacher, and my friend, and I miss him dearly.
I met Richard Taub when I was a young college student at the University of Chicago. And I was looking into the public policy major, which Richard had founded and led for some 25 years. And he made time to talk with me, and I went and we spoke. And upon hearing him talk with such clarity and such passion about scholarship meant to make real world change, I immediately joined the public policy major. And I came away thinking, I want to be like Richard Taub. I want to be like this man, like this teacher. And he was a teacher who really did set minds on fire with his razor-sharp intellect, his deep, joyful worldliness, his irreverent wit, and his passion for social change. He set my mind on fire and made me want to be like him as a teacher. Richard Taub was a wonderful teacher, and he was a scholar of high order. He made seminal contributions in the sociology of community development and neighborhood change. Richard's work documented and used the sociological lens to interpret some of the most important experiments in community banking in the United States. Richard's urban sociology, which focused equally on public policy and social inequality, it deeply influenced me, and it deeply influenced countless others. Richard was also a tremendous mentor, and he opened up space and offered guidance for so many to advance through the academy. It was Richard who invited me to apply over 20 years ago to my current job in the Department of Sociology at the University of Chicago. And back then I was feeling like maybe I don't have what it takes to be at a place like this. And it was Richard, like a true mentor, who encouraged me, saying, "You've got it. You belong here. You belong here." And so I became Richard's colleague. And as a colleague, I got to see him and admire him as a visionary, as an institution builder, and as a leader. Richard Taub was a wonderful man. And I've often felt that if I could achieve a fraction of what he had as a professional, as a friend, that I would have really done something in this brief life. And I'm so grateful to have known his marvelous example of a teacher, a scholar, a mentor, a leader, and a human being.
Our final set of speakers have pre-recorded their comments. Rick Schwader, Harold H. Swift, Distinguished Service Professor of Human Development, and Lara Perez Felkner, Associate Professor of Higher Education, Florida State University. And finally, Betty Farrell, Richard's wife, representing the family.
I'm Rick Schwader, a colleague of Richard's in the Department of Comparative Human Development and a friend. It's at moments like this that I think of a particular Yogi Berrarism. So many people are dying these days who've never died before. That one has been attributed to the anthropologist Clifford Geertz. It's not that I never expected Richard to die. It's just that I also thought of him as immortal, or at least as a permanent escort or eternal guide through life, directing us on the proper path to a more perfect future. They call it a king's death. He died in an instant. He died sitting in his favorite easy chair. He died as he lived, upright, outspoken, adventurous, caring about the world. In retirement, he was ever so happy and grateful that, as he told me more than once, that his career at the university took place during what he thought of as the heyday of the academy. That instant when the king died was astonishing for me and my wife Candy, because only a few hours earlier we had had a warm and lively Zoom session with Richard and Betty, reminiscing about the past and speculating about the future. Given the pandemic, he was quite protective of his health, but that moment when he left us was certainly not part of our speculation about the future. I've always cherished my conversations with Richard, and in a curious way, we were bonded to each other even before we met. Our reminiscences occasionally extended back to Great Neck, where we had both grown up on the North Shore of Long Island. It was a suburb I suspect we were both very happy to leave for life in an academic community such as Hyde Park. But Great Neck was also a remarkable source of University of Chicago faculty during a certain era. Richard was one of 8 senior members of the University of Chicago faculty, some now emeritus, including 2 provosts, who graduated from high school in that Long Island suburb during the mid-1950s through the late 1960s. For all I know, there may be others. He and I did not know each other back then. He was my elder by 7 years. It was fortuitous and fortunate for me that our paths later crossed. We both did our PhD thesis research at Harvard, conducting field research in the same location on the east coast of India as members of a research project organized by the anthropologist Cora Dubois on the modernization of a Hindu temple town called Bhubaneswar. Richard's research was about the organization and role of the Indian Administrative Service, the IAS, in the modernization process. He turned his PhD thesis research into a book titled Bureaucrats Under Stress, which was widely read by the Indian political elite. Some people are born to be leaders, and Richard was one of them. After receiving tenure in the college, serving as its associate dean and creating the undergraduate program in public policy, he joined the Department of Comparative Human Development and served as its chair 4 times and for over 10 years. His candor, compassion, decency, commitment to students, dedication to interdisciplinary scholarship, entrepreneurial talents, and ability to transcend factional differences while telling it like it is, made him beloved to his colleagues and our natural leader. Richard never looked back. Onward and upward was one of his favorite expressions. Onward and upward, Richard. We miss you terribly.
As a department chair, as a teacher, and as a mentor, Richard was wonderful about welcoming folks in and making them feel at ease, at getting us to tell our stories and to listen to those of others. He was an urban ethnographer and highly interdisciplinary in a world and field that tends not to do interdisciplinarity well. And it was really wonderful to have the opportunity to study with him during those years and to get to walk city streets when we were having walking meetings at conferences or moving between buildings at the U of C, going into class or a meeting. His energy and passion for doing work that was relevant on social issues that were pressing and real was really palpable and something that stays with me. And I know in talking with fellow students and alumni, especially the last several months, how much that stayed with all of us, of thinking about the questions and ideas planted around how to connect ideas that were shiny and intriguing and connect them up into the world, both in terms of theory as well as in terms of what the real world and policy implications are of the studies that we wanted to conduct and our purpose more largely in our career as well as in the particular studies that we were working on. Richard often had students who were from underrepresented backgrounds or otherwise didn't necessarily feel as immediately comfortable and at home at the University of Chicago and with the world of the U of C and the world of academia. And it's notable and was clearly observable how he would tend to have students flock to him who felt like they didn't automatically see a home somewhere else, both an intellectual home as well as feeling a sense of ease in their plan, especially when things got difficult. And he was not an easy mentor or teacher by any means. He pushed and he pushed hard for us to think about those big picture issues and connections. But I think that what stands over time is that clear sense of how he was so intentional in welcoming us and in forming community. And in academia, community can be formed in multiple meaningful ways. And there's certainly a connection among folks like me and others who were advised by him or had courses with him. And there's also the community that he built as a department chair for several years, and certainly the time that I was there at in human development, which then became comparative human development under his time as chair. And as a graduate student, you don't always notice and understand how difficult it is to form community out of a large and interdisciplinary department and one that was undergoing change. But it did feel like a home and a family. And that's not something that one can do lightly. And it was a gift. I think that he was certainly hardworking at it, at bringing people intentionally into his home, at telling stories of the food that he would make and bring in for us to think about that connected to the Southwest and various neighborhoods of Chicago, telling stories about communities that he had worked and been in and the South Shore Bank. These stories were threaded throughout the work that he did in courses and in informal conversations. But it was all tied together. And when I think about social networks and social capital and community change, which was certainly something that was important to him and important to his work, it's really remarkable how much of a through line there is in the brief years of his professional life that I saw, even in the work of Richard Taub, that he was able to have that through line connection of his research, his teaching, his service work that he did in the community in Chicago and beyond, and the way that he conducted himself as a department chair, a teacher, and a citizen, that he was really, it seemed, hopefully moving forward to create and enhance communities. And that is something that I will always keep in mind, from the small moments, like the ways that he would welcome us and our families when they would come to visit, or we were celebrating or working through a situation. But from the small to the larger picture, he was a community creator, sustainer, and change maker, and will be missed, and certainly will be remembered.
Richard built his personal and professional life thinking about, nurturing, and participating in communities. And there were multiple communities of family, of friends, of neighbors, of colleagues, and many cohorts of students that he taught, mentored, collaborated with, and whose careers he followed with great interest and pride over the years. So many of you have written to me and to Richard and Doris's children, Neela and Zach, to share your memories of Richard. And almost everyone mentions certain qualities of his that were hard to ignore. His straightforward directness, his honesty, his capacity, in the words of one of his former students, sometimes to be alarmingly frank, his authenticity, his realness. These traits of directness were always coupled with generosity, a true sense of caring, and a passionate commitment to making a difference in the world. And that characterized also his 50-plus years of work at and for the university. Richard loved the University of Chicago as his core professional and intellectual home. And in his very direct way, that meant that he was simultaneously a champion and a critic of its programs, policies, and initiatives over the years. Relatively late in his career, Richard became interested in the concept of honor, and that was largely based on his work in the American South. But he didn't much respect hierarchy and status. And so he could be equally as challenging to presidents, provosts, deans, administrators, chairs, colleagues, as he was to his graduate and undergraduate students. He defended and fought really hard for what he valued most about the university, its commitment to broad intellectual inquiry and to cross-disciplinary work. Richard often mentioned what the extraordinary experience that he valued a lot in his earliest years at the university in the 1970s and 80s, when a couple of colleagues might get together talking at the end of the day at the Quad Club and decide that there was an interesting interdisciplinary course that they might teach together. And then they proceed to go ahead and do it. He loved that kind of institutional flexibility, and especially the kind of collegial collaboration that it inspired. The themes of his scholarly work, as many of the speakers have already noted, centered around community economic development and neighborhoods, entrepreneurship, bureaucracy, and organizational dynamics. And even when he was teaching courses in the core on Adam Smith, on Tocqueville, it was always with the interest of what they could help illuminate about contemporary American society. In his scholarly work, in his teaching, he was committed to understanding how things actually work in the real world of organizations and communities. And he was enormously proud of seeing how his former students were carrying out that tradition and those values in the range of policy work and fields that they went into, in their research pursuits, and in academic careers. On behalf of our family, I want to thank you all very much for sharing in this commemoration and celebration of Richard's life at the university for over 50 years. He touched a lot of lives, none more so than in our family, where we're profoundly missing his presence in our lives. It was a large presence. But we frequently hear his voice and some of the signature pieces of advice he'd share widely with us, perhaps also with some of you. Don't waste time on regret. Look ahead, seize new opportunities, and run with them. Remember that the best is the enemy of the good. Be honest, speak truth to power, be alarmingly frank when necessary. Aim to make a difference in the world. Onward and upward.
Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. From William Shakespeare's Cymbeline. And yet, in the words of Sylvan Caymans and Jack Reamer, in the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. Thank you so much for joining us for this memorial celebration of the life of Richard Taub. This concludes our celebration. Go in peace and have a good night.